Personally, I think everybody could benefit from the home visiting programs.
I think that as a parent now, I'm grateful for support more than I was before.
I filled out that form not knowing what I was doing. I am very, very grateful that I did it because it's really helping me a lot.
Bueno, creo que por mi parte esperaba algo totalmente diferente, como un programa más frío, por decir algo, no tan cercano a la familia. Y a través del programa nos hemos dado cuenta que también pasa a ser una familia con nosotros porque nos apoya en los momentos difíciles o cuando nos hemos visto en dificultades.
Well, I was a new mom and I had no experience taking care of a newborn.
There isn't like a book on how to raise a kid.
We come from like a lot of family history of, drugs, violence, alcoholism, so we didn't want our daughter to.
Okay, good morning, everyone. We're going to call the meeting to order. It's 9:01. It's February 28th, 2024. This is the General Government Committee, and I'm going to have roll call.
Chair Hashak?
Here.
Supervisor McGordy?
Here. Okay, Tamara Alanese, the General Manager of Brook Trails Community Services District, could you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? All right. So good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming to the meeting today. We've got a different agenda item. We're going to deal with the discussion and possible action, including consideration of potential revisions to Mendocino County Code, Chapter 8.77, titled Hazardous Vegetation, Combustible Material, Rubbish, and Weeds, which is also known as the Abatement of Hazardous Vegetation and Combustible Material Nuisance Ordinance, and evaluating potential funding sources for implementation. Okay, so we're going to, I'd like to thank a lot of people who put in a lot of time on this already. And Jim Ross, our interim county counsel, has looked into it. John Bergs, Gretchen, from code enforcement have really spent a lot of time analyzing it. It's all in relation to some of these issues we're seeing in Mendocino County, where we have deadbeat or absentee owners that aren't responsive to cleaning up their property, and a lot of the jurisdictions, like in Brook Trails, doesn't have the capacity to really deal with all of these if they're just unresponsive. But we do have some grants through Mendocino County Fire Safe Council, and also the Sherwood Fire Wise Council has some grants from Caltrans and other entities. So they're looking to do this kind of cleanup work, and they aren't able to do it because they can't just trespass on someone's land and clean up the property to make it safer. And especially in Brook Trails, where we have multiple lots around each developed lot, in some cases, that the multiple lots present a real fire danger, and so people are very concerned about that. We want to try to we've looked at trying to use the this vegetation abatement ordinance. And so I appreciate the work that Keith Rutledge, who's not here, but he's also done a lot of work on it, and contacted the Matt Silver, an attorney with a lot of expertise in these kind of ordinances, and he's from Orange County, I think. And our interim county council has also contacted him and had some conversations, and so we have had some kind of new developments or new thoughts going into what we can do as far as what the county's role is, and if there's any changes or anything that need to be done with the vegetation abatement ordinance. We also you know, in our discussion the other week at the board meeting, we talked about what the long-term solution to this would be, because, okay, we clean up these properties right now, but then do we have to go back in 5 years, go through another legal process to get them cleaned up and do that again? So are there any other ways of like shifting the ownership from one, you know, from the deadbeat or the absentee owners to like the neighboring property, or to the green belt, or some other entity that might want to take it on as kind of a park or something? So we're going to hopefully look at some of those kind of questions too today. We just had a report from Katrina Bartolome, or was it Sarah Pierce, I guess, yesterday, talked about the number of properties that were not paying, you know, property taxes and for the last 5 years or so, and that they were going to go to auction in June. And she said that there were something like 299 properties that they were really proceeding on. And I bet 275 or 250 are probably in the Brook Trails area. And so I didn't get that specific question answered by her, but we're certainly looking at, you know, a big amount, and hopefully, you know, with Sarah Pierce moving these things along, we'll be able in a better position to deal with them in some other way. Okay, traditionally, I think that some of these properties that have gone to auction have been bought up, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, Tamara, but sometimes real estate brokers will buy them up for $1 or something and then resell them and, you know, perpetuate the cycle. And we, you know, maybe we could think about how to break that cycle too. So, Supervisor McGorty.
Yeah, so thinking about that, I think it's very important that when these places go up for sale, if they go up for sale, that we let everybody know that they're going to have to pay for some level of maintenance on the property. And I don't even know if that could be worked even in escrow or along with back taxes. You know, if there's a lien on the property, then correct me if I'm wrong, Counselor, but if there's a lien on the property and it goes into a tax sale, do people have to pay that, or is that, how does that work in the title transfer process? Do you know?
Supervisor McGorty through the chair. Depends on the lien and how the lien was placed on the property. Mm-hmm. Under Government Code Section 25845, there can be liens placed on the property for costs of abatement and things of that nature. But I believe, and I'd have to double check this, that the actual tax lien has priority, but I'd have to confirm that.
Okay. That makes sense. I'm just wondering if there's a way that we can build the abatement costs into a lien that would also have to be paid along with the taxes on the property. It would seem to make sense if this is an ongoing problem, so that people are aware at the time that they purchase the property, they will be expected to maintain it.
Yeah, if the bid price were high enough to cover both the tax lien and the lien under Government Code Section 25845, then presumably, depending on whether there are other competing liens, mm-hmm. There would be money there to pay off that.
Okay, thank you.
My experience has been mainly with the Brook Trails in that situation. But, you know, according to Scott Craddy, and that this is a county-wide problem. And when I was at Mike McGuire's inauguration as the Senate Pro Tem the other week, and I sat next to the chief for CAL FIRE for the state, I was telling him about the Brook Trails situation, and he said, this is a problem throughout the state. And so it's really Not just Brook Trails, not just Mendocino County, but statewide. So anyway, with the heightened fire danger, we're certainly looking for solutions to these problems. I'm going to look to interim county counsel Jim Ross, who's done some exploration on this issue.
Thank you very much. My plan today was to go over some of the authority that the county would have to enter onto property to do abatement work and what that process looks like with the assistance of code enforcement for their portions they would cover, and I'll cover sort of the more legal from a court perspective. And then what it might look like should the county have that authority and how we would go about it, implementing any work to be done. And then look at maybe some long-term solutions, or at least long-term thoughts about how we go about addressing this problem. And hopefully I'll hit all the issues that you've talked about, and I'll be prepared to answer any questions from you or the members of the public. I will say that at Mr. Silver, who you mentioned, the attorney in Orange County who does a lot of code enforcement work throughout the state. I know Mr. Silver, I've known him for years. We had a very nice conversation about this. And I've also talked to the general counsel with RCRC to look into whether there were anything on the horizon that we should know about, or if he had heard of any creative solutions, and I'll kind of go through those discussions as well. Initially, one of the things that in talking with code enforcement about, we wondered if it would be helpful for staff to meet with the stakeholders that are looking at trying to get consent from the property owners. Because my understanding is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that it's been difficult to, sometimes you have absentee owners, you can't find them, you can't locate them, outreach isn't being responded to, and if the committee were to take this to the board and receive direction to assist in that outreach effort, then maybe there's some resources that we have available that could identify or locate some of these absentee landowners and make it make the problem a little smaller, because to the extent we don't get voluntary consent to do work on the property, it makes it that much harder to get the legal authority to go in and do it.
Can I interrupt for a
Sure.
sec? One of the ideas was to not just make it smaller, but also group them, aggregate them together.
Right.
So is that a possibility?
So in terms of getting consent, we would need to get consent to do the work from each individual property owner. When I say we, either us or the Fire Safe Council or whomever is going to carry out that work. But if we go through a legal process, there is an option for sort of doing a grouping. And maybe since you asked the question, I'll jump to that, and then we can bring in the code enforcement folks to talk about the administrative process. As a preface, one of the items of concern, as I understand it, is whether or not we needed to do amendments to our current ordinance in order to do this type of work. I've looked at the ordinances, and in particular, portions of Chapter 8 of the Mendocino County Code referring to nuisance abatement. And I think as currently drafted, there is authority to go through a nuisance abatement process. Could there be improvements? Could there be refinements to the ordinance? Sure. That's true of almost every county ordinance that's been around for longer than 48 hours. But currently as drafted, I think our ordinances would give us the ability to go through either an administrative process or a court proceeding to get authority to go on to property cleanup. that was one of the topics that Mr. Silver and I discussed, and he was of the same opinion. One way of going about getting legal authority to go onto property without consent of the owners would be to go through a lawsuit in Superior Court, where you name the owners of the property, allege that they're maintaining a nuisance on their property, and go through the legal process, get a court order that you can go in, enter the property, abate the nuisance, and certainly we would try to seek a permanent injunction against them maintaining that nuisance, which may give you the ability to do it on shortened time in the future. For example, permanent injunction says, and you shall never maintain this nuisance again. So 5 years from now, you go out, you find they're maintaining the nuisance again, rather than having to go through the whole process again, you can just allege that they're in violation of the court order and allege contempt and get another order that they go do it, and if they don't do it, they can get fined. Ultimately, in the egregious circumstances, can actually jail the person, but I've only seen that once in 30 years.
But we can't even find the person.
Well, and that would, there is a process to deal with the fact when you can't actually find somebody to serve. And so I think you can still get the default judgment if you're unable to find the person, they don't respond. It just takes a little bit more time. The advantages of a court proceeding to do that kind of mask permission is you can do it pretty much at one time. It'll be very complicated because of the number of properties involved. It'll take some time because some owners may respond, some owners may not. There may be hearings that have to go on before the court about particular properties, but ultimately at the end of the day, you have an order for each property, assuming you're successful. I've done that type of thing once before, not on this scale. I did it with 58 properties, and since it was a dangerous bridge that they were not maintaining. The outcome in that case was good in the sense that ultimately there was a settlement, and the property owners agreed to take care of the problem. And that's a much smaller scale, and it was a different type of neighborhood than what I understand the Trails area to be. But that is one process to go through in order to get legal authority to go on to a piece of private property and do a cleanup effort.
Supervisor McGordy?
So when you say you can't find someone, I mean, I assume that they're still paying taxes on some of these parcels and that they have an address and that you're able to send a registered letter to them?
No, well, my understanding is that there's these people that we, out of the 6,000 lots in Brook Trails, 1,500 basically are developed. So 4,500 are undeveloped. And out of those, I think 50% are non-responsive owners. And, and some of them, might be people who've inherited this lot from their grandfather and have never seen it, never been to California before or whatever. Just, they're not part of the equation. They're not paying, taxes. And I guess some are, because there's only less than 300, but that aren't. But a lot of these people are just very unresponsive.
And if I may, through the chair, and I'll defer to people who have been involved in the outreach process to maybe comment on this, but I suspect that some are just not able to be found because as the title is transferred hands because of deaths. Sometimes that title hasn't even been really cleaned up. you find out that you've got a deceased person and there's never been any actual transfer of title. Some may actually get notice and just not respond for whatever reason. Again, I'll kind of defer to those who've been engaged in that outreach process, but those are sort of two different problems in my mind. One is if you can actually get in contact with them and somehow get their consent, that reduces the number of properties that would have to go through any sort of legal process in order to go in and clean up effort. Those where title hasn't been cleared up, you can't find them in the wind, there is a way of handling that through a court process. That's one advantage to going to Superior Court on something like this, is because the law does have mechanisms to deal with that type of a situation where you can't find the defendant, whereas in an administrative hearing, and I'll let John speak to this when he gets up, but my experience is most hearing officers are going to go, what? I don't know what to do with this, and feel very uncomfortable rendering an order when there's an absentee. We have no idea who really owns the property. I see Mr. Burks entering.
Let's see, let me just clear up one thing with the clerk. Mr. Burks.
Good morning, committee members, Chair. I just wanted to add to, as far as my understanding, and I'm not necessarily an expert in this field with those tax defaults and then the properties going to auction, is there's typically 5 subsequent years of no payment. So there may only be a few hundred right now, but there could be many more that are in the 5 years worth of default that could be coming in the near future as well. So I'm sure that that number is significantly larger.
Yeah, that's accurate. Waiting for properties to get sold through a tax default sale can take a significant amount of time. So I've kind of outlined some of the benefits of a Superior Court type of process. I asked Mr. Burks and his colleagues to come and talk about the administrative process a little bit, and how it might work in this type of situation and what would be involved for staff time and costs and things of that nature.
And we have seen that analysis, right? Okay.
Yes, Chair. Yeah, we
But
did provide that at the board item. And then I wasn't sure if it made it to the attachments for the General Government Committee, but I think I can sum it up on a very high level for you. So John Burks, Assistant Planning and Building Services Director, to comment on what Jim is describing in terms of the tools that code enforcement has through our department in these type of situations. There's 2 basic ones that are called out in the 877 law, and that's abatement, which takes 2 forms, summary abatement and administrative abatement, and then citations. And there's a few challenges with using these 2 particular tools as a solution to hazardous vegetation. One is it's a one-time solution, typically speaking. I think it would be more of a court order that may provide a long-term solution, but as they're described right now, it's really just those tools are designed to solve an immediate problem. So, and they're both, well, I'll start with the abatement procedures, as they're expensive. It takes a lot of staff time. Typically, on these $3,000 lots in Brook Trails as the example. So I'll speak about Brook Trails as the example rather than the whole county because it's got a unique circumstance where these lots may be $3,000, you know, and they're not buildable. So there's no investment from a property owner to do anything with them. So when an abatement a forced abatement on an individual lot can be up to $15,000 in expense to the county, even if we liened it, it would then put that lot even less likely to have anything positive happen to it because it wasn't worth much before. It's worth even less now that somebody would have to pay that cost to remediate it. And the other is a citation. So let's take this $3,000 lot example. We could give them a ticket, but if they don't have any investment to solve the problem, it may not necessarily get us any kind of result in terms of just throwing good money after bad to have code enforcement try to use a citation as leverage. Whereas if a property has more value, say, you know, $150,000, and we give them a few hundred or a few $1,000s worth of tickets, that might inspire them to do something about it. Where I have a feeling if these property owners haven't walked away entirely already, if we engage them, we might scare them off even further. So those are the two tools: administrative abatement and tickets that are called out in the law. I think that's probably the highest level summary I can provide, and I can clarify any details.
Your microphone's not on.
Talking about what Mr. Burke said about summary abatement. Summary abatement is essentially where you just go in, you do it, you take care of it, and you don't have a due process or a court process or an administrative process. That type of remedy is really reserved for those situations that are extreme. I think the classic law school example was, you know, is it okay for a fire department to go in and destroy a house to prevent the fire from spreading to the remainder, you know, 1,000 houses? Could you do that? I've used that process twice in my career. Once to prevent a house from causing significant flooding hazards to people upstream because it threatened to go into the river and cause a dam. The other situation where we did use a 5-day abatement process was a trailer in a residential area that had significant amount of explosives and had a blast radius of about 2 miles. So that's an illustration of the extreme situations where summary abatement is called for. Also, as Mr. Burke said, the administrative process typically is sort of a one-time deal. Now, it may be a little easier the next time you do it because you've already built some of the record and stuff like that. The advantage of the court process, again, is if you can convince the court to give you a permanent injunction, it does shorten up the time when you have to return. Sort of on the administrative and court processes, are there any questions? Because I was going to move on to, okay, what if we get authority to enter the property? What does that look like?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay. So once you get authority to enter onto the property, the next problem is, okay, how do you actually do the work? In this situation, I see a couple ways of going about it. Obviously, one issue is always going to be the funding because a lot of times you spend money on abatement, and even if you get the lien, you may not recover it because of the value of the property, or it may take you a while before you recover it. And so in practice, in code enforcement, you sort of have to predict that you're going to have to carry some of that cost for a while. But you know, one option would be for the county to then enter into a contract with somebody to do the abatement work. Obviously, of concern is going to be to make sure that whoever the county contracted with had sufficient insurance, indemnification provisions, to try and limit the risk for the county so that, you know, they're not out there cutting brush and causing a spark that then causes a fire that arguably somebody could say we'd be responsible for. Another option to explore would be if some of these agencies that have funds have the wherewithal or the structure to actually take on the work themselves, is whether or not we could then contract with those entities to oversee the work. Again, we want to make sure that we had adequate contractual protections for the county, but that might be another way to do it. One thing that's always been a concern in this area, and I've seen it as a hindrance to doing some fire break work and stuff like that, is that for the most recent years, the Department of Industrial Relations has determined that this type of work is often subject to prevailing wage and ultimately increases the cost of doing the work. There is a bill that was recently passed, I believe it's AB 338. It's codified in Public Resources Code 80203, and it does provide some exemptions for fuel reduction efforts on private property. And so I think, if that were the course of action, we'd want to do further analysis to make sure that that code section did in fact apply these circumstances. And there's also, would have to confirm the operative date of that code section. I believe there may be a delay in its operative date. That kind of hits, once you get the authority, how do you actually get the work done? Then, I was going to throw out some ideas about other possible solutions, long-term considerations. Supervisor Hashek, as you said, when I spoke to Arthur Wyleen at RCRC, his comment was, this is a problem all over the state, and if you come up with a brilliant solution to solve it, let me know. And I also talked to some of my colleagues who are representing fire protection districts throughout Northern California. And again, this is an issue that many of them are facing. One possibility would be to explore whether there is an entity that would be willing to take on ownership of those properties, and whether or not the county would be in a position to provide assistance to facilitating that type of transaction. I think it would depend somewhat on what entity might be interested, and you still have the problem of making sure that you've got willing sellers, essentially.
So just on that point, for these ones that aren't paying their taxes, going to auction, the willing seller is the county. And could we enter into an agreement with like Brook Trails or the Greenbelt or property owners who are neighboring properties? Could the county kind of direct the sale in that way?
I don't know that the county can necessarily direct the sale. We'd have to look at that further and see what you're thinking, figure out exactly what you're kind of thinking about and how that would look like. I think one thing, that could possibly be done is, assuming the board gave direction and we're able to put the staff together to do it, is do an outreach effort as part of those auction sales to make sure that I know that the parcel next to me is going up for auction. I might be interested. I'll say a practical problem, and this is, I'm a lawyer. I'm not the field person, but a practical problem that I see is, would an owner want to take on the responsibility of maintaining and owning the adjacent property if it's really not usable property, because it's not like they're trying to protect their view. It's not going to be built on. So you'd have to kind of figure out what the motivation would be to get them to take on that responsibility.
Right.
And that kind of covers the second part, which was exploring ways of encouraging property owners to maybe acquire some of these properties. Again, it's possible the county with the correct direction and making sure that we had the available staff might be able to assist with something like that. I think we should continue to work on legislative efforts at the state of California to try and find some solutions to these types of problems, maybe streamline it or provide additional funding sources. When I reached out to RCRC, the General Counsel reached out to their lobbyists. Right now, the biggest focus in the legislature seems to be, with respect to fire, seems to be dealing with the home insurance crisis. That's kind of where their focus is right now. And I'm not aware of anything that is currently in process to really go at this type of problem. One other thing I thought about is seeing if there was a way to identify, strategically go at this in a way to identify maybe properties that we put extra effort into, either going through a court process, an administrative process, or outreach process to create fire breaks or some other fire protection measures. It wouldn't be as effective as going through and clearing all properties, but it also may be more effective in the way of us being able to get consent to go out and do this. And I think that would have to be a collaborative effort, certainly between the property owners, the association, the fire safe councils, and certainly a role played by the county in looking into that. But it's not an easy problem to solve.
Just if I can interrupt.
Sure.
About your point about the legislative fix. And we had Supervisor McGordy and I were going to meet with Mendocino County Fire Safe Council and Sherwood Firewise and this Chief of Staff of Assemblymember Wood, Ruth Valenzuela, to talk about these issues and try to see if there was any kind of legislative fix that we could. But when the board decided to send this to General Government Committee, we postponed that meeting so that we could see what comes out of today's meeting.
And I should, I'm a bit remiss in the sense that I mentioned RCRC a couple times. I think you'd find support from CSAC as well. And, I haven't specifically talked to anybody with the League of California Cities. They go by Cal Cities now. This is a problem that's being faced in rural areas, suburban areas, and even to a certain extent in urban areas. And so, there may be a method to get kind of a groundswell of support if we're all rowing in the same direction. And so I think long term, that's probably one of the more effective things we can do is to try and get the law changed at the state level and give us more tools to use. I've hit most of the highlights that I had planned to discuss today. I think at this stage, in terms of next steps, it might be worth having a meeting with stakeholders or Fire Safe Council to see if they believe there's assistance that we provide in outreach efforts, at least to see if it's an idea worth exploring. If it is, then bring that to the board and get direction to allow us to pursue that. And, you know, maybe meet with CAL FIRE or any other fire protection districts out in that area that have jurisdiction to explore the idea of strategic efforts. I see those meetings as being, at least initially, fairly short meetings to explore whether the concept is worth spending more time on. You hate to spend a bunch of time or get direction to do something that you go out and you talk to CAL FIRE and they're like, yeah, no, it's not going to work. So that'd be sort of an exploratory, is it worth spending the time to try and do that work and identify those areas?
You know, I think that those those areas have been identified in some ways. I know Brook Trails Fire Department has a plan of boxing in the area.
Right.
It's just that when you start drawing those lines of the box, then you're hitting one, you're missing three,
Right.
because they're non-responsive.
Well, so as you described it, and I'm not super familiar with the area, but as you described it, you know, we may have 300 non-responsive pieces of property. Maybe only 20 of those are necessary to create a fire break that would be helpful. It's a lot easier to go to court on 20 properties and get authority to go in, work, than it would be to go on and try and get all 300. So that's why I'm thinking as a more effective, more time efficient way is explore whether or not that theory works. If it doesn't work, well then, you know, we kind of discard it and go on to what else we might be able to do.
Okay. Supervisor McGordy.
So I have a series of questions. Maybe Tamara would be the best person to answer it. So I'm not super familiar with Brook Trails. I've been there several times, but I haven't driven all over the place and seen everything. So what kind of vegetation is covering a lot of these parcels that aren't being really responsive?
Thank you, Supervisor McGordy. Tamara Alaniz, Brook Trails Township Community Services District. We have a mixed forest. We have hardwoods, we have redwoods. Most of the abatement work that you want done is going to be on tan oak, firs, and underbrush. We also have grassy lots that are located within the fire district assessment area in Sylvandale and Spring Creek. And then in Brook Trails Township proper, where the majority of these, the 6,000 lots are located, it's a mixed forest. So I would invite Jim and you, Glenn, up if you want to just maybe kind of take a look and familiarize yourself. You know, I'd certainly be willing to participate in something like that with you. But I think two things come to mind. One is the ability of property owners to actually do the abatement. When we're talking about the cost for an entity to do it, you're talking about the cost of the individual to do it. And when you have someone who maybe never even wanted the property in the first place, maybe they don't even know that they own it, maybe it's part of a trust. There's a lot of, like I think it was mentioned earlier in this meeting, there's a lot of times when earlier tax sales occurred that just kicked the can down the road because there was an attempt at reinvestment and they paid $3,000 in the tax sale and they sold it to some unsuspecting person who lives in another county somewhere in California, and the cycle went on. So I definitely have a couple ideas that I wanted to talk about with you today, but just in answer to your question, it's firs, tan oaks, underbrush. Those are the kinds of things that we're primarily talking about when we're talking about abatement.
So I imagine this would be what I call senescent type situation, meaning that it's been let go and there's a lot of substantial biomass in there underneath, so like control burns and such would be pretty difficult without having a crown.
Yeah, and I would dare throw this caveat in there too, which is the PG&E vegetation abatement that's been going on, the clear cutting along some of these utility easements has created a new underbrush style of abatement that needs to be done, where you've got these rooterals and quick growing underbrush that have come in along some of these adjacent utility easements that I think are going to be another element of risk in the future as we see what does that look like when you're talking about maybe a flash fire? Maybe it has nothing to do with the tree that hits the line, right? It's something else, and then that potentially creates another hazard that we're starting to see. So that's kind of another vegetation element.
So thinking about this from a practical point of view, I'm guessing that as much mechanization as you could do for abatement using things like a masticator type equipment or feller bunchers to pull out small trees. And the other avenue in economic development that we're going down is looking at sort of a biomass biofuel process, and this would be kind of a prime source of biomass to aggregate and bring for processing, all right? So that's something that the economics are being studied right now to see if that's even feasible. We're going to have a conference on May 2nd and 3rd in Hopland to discuss this, and I think it'd be very interesting to see how that works out. So where it works best for looking at biofuels is where you already have the waste supply. So for instance, MRC is probably going to set up some kind of a biomass pyrolysis machine that will make energy and also possibly biofuels, either natural gas or possibly hydrogen. So all they have to do is take the sawdust that's at their plant, and they're claiming that aggregating biomass probably isn't such a great idea, that they're not sure the economics can work out. But I think for places where we have a problem, you know, like a neighborhood like this, that could be a place where maybe you subsidize a little bit to take the biomass out and thin it so that you've created a fire-safe zone. So you know, from a policy point of view, if we're thinking about, okay, what are we going to do? It seems like there's a real commonality, and particularly communities surrounded by forest, and it becomes more of a problem when it's national forest, and they've been let go since the spotted owl controversy in the 1990s, that there needs to be a policy that allows some kind of methodology for aggregating that biomass that creates a threat to the community that could actually be processed and used. And again, going back to RCRC, they've started an organization called Golden State Natural Resources. You've probably heard of it, and they want to make pellets that they can sell overseas for coal substitute, and they're ramping up now in 2 locations to do that. So that could be part of our solution for places like this, and a good portion of Mendocino County that needs to be thinned, but has to have some sort of an economic feasible way to do it, and this could be the beginning of something like that.
Yeah, a friend of mine's actually working on putting that project together, and we discussed it a couple months ago. It's a fascinating project. One thing that your comments brought up, you know, I think it would be important before we got too far down any sort of road of actually trying to get authority to go in and do a cleanup, is to try and get some assessment of the magnitude of what that would involve. You know, just it would be, in my opinion, a not particularly effective or efficient to go and get authority and then to find out it just can't actually do.
Not physically possible.
Yeah, or that the funding needs are so large that they're not available at that time. You know, I think my recommendation would be to try to get a cost estimate of what we would be looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And then as you mentioned, I think, probably not, at this meeting, we've talked about Brook Trail, but I suspect there's many other parts of the county where there are similar, maybe not to the same degree, but at least similar types of concerns. Again, that's not necessarily a legal issue for right now and what we're looking at, but it's a practical issue long term.
Yeah, well, Walla Sea Ranch have a really big issue because when they developed that area, they planted a lot of trees, including, I think, Monterey pines. And of course, now they're very senescent. They're in the 50, 60-year-old range, and they have huge fire hazards, and they were planted really densely, like 10 by 10, because they wanted quick screening. And so I know that there's multiple communities that are facing this issue. So
as far as the funding goes, and Scott Craddy could probably talk to this better than I, but I believe that Sherwood Firewise Council received like a $2.7 million grant from Caltrans to do home hardening and some of that work. And then we've also applied for this $50 million grant through FEMA, a brick grant, and that's focused on the Brook Trails area. So we're still waiting to hear from that. And Schwinn Malela was here earlier, but she left. I wanted her to talk about the grants that were also part of this big picture of what we're trying to do. The grants that she has, that one was for $187,000, another for $104,000, and she thought that they could be repurposed for whatever we needed to do as far as redoing the ordinance or strengthening it, but it doesn't sound like that's what's needed right now.
one is online if we want to get
Oh.
her. So she's participating.
When?
Have her in a second, maybe.
Okay. Scott, did you have anything to add to that? With the scope of what we're dealing with in Mendocino County?
Yeah, so Scott Craddy, Executive Director of the Mendocino County Fire Safe Council. Thanks for all the work you've put into this. I guess, first thing I'd like to say is I would strongly urge you to take this as broadly as possible and not focus on brook trails per se. Fire does not respect property lines. That's one of the things we've come to realize, and we've also come to realize that you can't protect a community without protecting the community. The weak spots, and that's the way grant funding of the future is coming. Probably the biggest risk we actually have are the homes themselves in a wildfire, and California is starting to put money to help people retrofit their homes, which is what we need, but they're only going to do that when you have a whole group of homes together. And you can only have a whole group of homes together if you get property owner permission. And you can only do large-scale projects like that will produce things to, produce fuel if you have property owner permissions for all of those things. And we are getting hammered by that on all levels in wildfire management, not just the brook trails thing, but every time you want to put in a fire break, you can't put in a fire break unless you get every property owner's permission. And half of the property owners just don't respond. Actually, 80% of them just don't respond. So it's a huge issue on fire breaks generally. It's a huge issue. An acute local example is the Eastern Hills of Ukiah. A few years ago, there was an emergency process where the governor exempted CEQA. Cal Fire rushed in and put in a fire break. None of the landowners will let them back on to maintain it. So it is going to be useless in another year. So the problem is kind of everywhere and global. We can't manage fire unless we can manage the landscape, and you can't manage the landscape without landowner permissions. So, from what I'm hearing today, the abatement process, it would be nice if we had a handy, usable abatement process for the extreme cases. It sounds like it's always going to be too expensive for anything but the extreme cases, which is going to get us, 5% of where we need to go. What I hear that is promising is, that there may be help finding the landowners, because that is a huge issue. The data we have is we get
When we use the county property records to mail out to landowners, we probably get a 20% return to sender because the address information is bad, so just helping us find them would be huge. And secondly, I think the next thing that I hear is promising is moving to a legislative effort, because this is something that is going to stop effective wildfire prevention work, not only in Mendocino County, but everywhere. But the counties that solve it first are going to have quicker access to that big funding that's coming down the line that allows people who have coherent projects to fund those projects.
So as far as contacting owners and the county's role in that, do you have a specific idea? I think Keith Rutledge has talked about some specifics that he has had.
No, I perked up when it was mentioned that there might be some way to help us with that. I would love to find out what that might be.
And I do have, go ahead.
So Scott, you're saying that the landowners basically don't want to give you permission to retreat the area after it's been treated?
That is one big instance, yes. Things happened. Some of their fence was taken down and not put back up. They just didn't like having people on their property. So there's a whole wide range of things out there. But yeah, the issue is that unless the landowner gives you permission, you can't do a fire break, and a fire break that is patchwork is not a great fire break and is not going to protect the community. And similarly, one of the big findings out of the Paradise Fire is that if you do your best job maintaining your property for fire, you're probably okay. Wildfires move through pretty fast unless your neighbor's house catches fire. And your neighbor's house is what puts everybody else in the neighborhood in jeopardy. The house that's not prepared is the one that sits and burns for hours and sends embers into the neighborhood. That was one of the big risks they found in Paradise, is that one of the few factors that was indicative was how close you were to a neighbor that burned. And people burn in patterns, and so do communities. So we need to try to use the resources we have. So there are some funds out there, as I understand it. I don't know the details. Sven would know them much better than I do. But to be able to use that to sort of talk together and try to mold something that's going to fit a broader solution than taking one property at a time to court.
So my friend Jana Valkovic framed it really nicely. She said, we can't really do much about earthquakes. We can't prevent them, but we can make our houses and buildings survive them. And she said that's probably how we're going to need to think about how we deal with wildfire in California, because it sounds like actually going out and treating every single acre to make it so it burns less is probably not going to be feasible. And maybe that's the wrong approach to take.
Nope, very correct. We start our communities, we move out, we strategically surround them. That's the way cultural burning used to happen, is communities around. But the trick is, when you start with the community, you start with property issues where they're most intense. So we need to spend some time working on a pathway. That's
okay. Thank you.
But I think, if through the chair, I think we also need to spend some time educating people, because we haven't really had this conversation, because it hasn't been that necessary until about 2015, 2016, when we really started seeing the effects of mega drought on the landscape and the implications it has for how fast things can burn. So.
Okay. I wanted to turn to Shwen Malela. Good morning, Shwen.
So apologies for that. So yes, we do have in terms of grant, we have about $100,000 for a planning project and about $187,000 for an implementation project that we could repurpose. However, these are from the 2017 funding, so they do have to be countywide. They do have to benefit the zip code that benefits the Redwood Valley, because that's where what triggers the grant funding. But so we can't focus on brook trails. We just have to figure out what the scope will be, and staff will be happy to put it together and submit to HCD to see if it's gets approved. So these grants are supposed to expire in 2025, but the state has been really flexible. We can request an amendment anytime that we want. In terms of the BRIC grant, it is $50 million. The 25% match has been approved already, just waiting for the overall project to be approved, and it does cover uh, everything: hazardous fuels reduction, um, uh, home hardening for the Sherwood area and the Brook Trails area. Is there any other questions for me?
So you really think that these two grants can be repurposed? They just need to be focused on the county-wide? Or they can...
Yes. Yeah, these grants, the state, I think, has some funding that were not fully purposed. So they have been really flexible with the county and, allowing us to coming up with a new scope and amending our timeline. So we just have to figure out what the project would be.
Okay. So figuring out that project is our task. Okay, thank you, Schwinn.
If I may, through the chair, to follow up on some of the comments made, one of the difficulties in this area, in terms of trying to go in and do cleanup initially, is next year, 2 years from now, you may have the exact same problem that you just cleaned up, depending on what that work looks like. As I was talking to one of my colleagues last night about this, and a fire chief that we work with always says you can't stop photosynthesis. So, that is also trying to strategically think about this as a long-term solution. You need to think about targeted efforts versus more holistic efforts. I do have some ideas on the outreach area. Mr. Burks and I spent some time talking about this in the last couple weeks, and there may be some county assistance that can be provided. It's possible maybe some of this grant funding might be able to be used. We'd have to follow up on that issue. I also have sort of some non-government ideas about how the Fire Safe Council might approach trying to get some of these absentee owners to respond. I don't know if they've utilized them. I think that'd be a good discussion for us to have. It's not an unusual problem to have people not respond to these types of outreach programs, and maybe through putting our heads together and trying to have a more targeted approach, maybe we can provide some assistance in that area, or at least some ideas for the Fire Safe Council.
I guess if Schwinn's still on the line, do you think that those grants could be repurposed for outreach?
So in executive office, we could work with the team there and to come up with the scope. We do need obviously a deliverable at the end of the project.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there are resources that are going fallow right now because of the access issue, and I just wanted to add that as well. So to the extent that some of those resources could be repurposed to even hiring collection agencies, track people using whatever tools they have or whatever, but we have a grant right now to help clear vacant or non-owner lots around people in Brook Trails, and we've been pounding our heads at getting permissions. And similarly, we've got money to clear roads in Ridgewood. We've got several $100,000 sitting there, and we've been unable to get landowner permissions for large strips of the road there. So to the extent that there's an easy path to better permission, that's a way to help get resources that are available now on the ground. That would be wonderful.
And in my review of the problem, I came to sort of the same conclusion, is that that might be one of the most time-effective ways of trying to at least put a dent into the problem. And if I may, after the meeting is over, you know, I might have some ideas for the Fire Safe Council that they want to consider that aren't necessarily involving county help, but that I've seen useful in other situations.
Okay.
And then, if I may, I wanted to ask Mr. Burks if there's anything that we discussed that he wanted to touch on that hasn't already been touched on, because, like I said, I'm just the lawyer. I'm not the person doing the work on the ground.
Yeah, just before
Sure.
Mr. Burks, Supervisor McGordy?
Yeah, so my background is in vegetation management, and towards the end of my career, one of the things that I started working with was grazing as a way of taking care of vineyard floors in the wintertime. And my neighbor took it a step further and decided to graze the riparian area along his vineyard, and I was amazed what 400 goats can do in a week. And thinking about follow-up for these areas that need to be touched up, that's sort of prime browse. When you have something that's 2 to 3 years old, goats can clean that up pretty quick and pretty effectively. And, you know, it's not as hard to do as it sounds. So what they did is they had portable electric fencing that they set up, and they have guard dogs, and I mean, they've got a system. And the reason I found out about them is that somebody was mowing the vineyard, and they hit the extension cord that runs the electric charger on the fence, and all of a sudden there were 400 goats in my vineyard, which isn't a good thing. So it's kind of a low-tech solution that I know has been around in California for a while, and it's something that I think as a follow-up treatment could be very, very effective, because, again, the labor cost paying someone prevailing wage would be high, and goats don't work for prevailing wage, they work for food. So this is something that, again, could be integrated in the, like everything, like in landscaping, we talk about zoning your landscape based on water use and high value versus something that you're not using as much and you don't irrigate it and you go to native vegetation. So there's probably a gradient of where we concentrate and how much effort we give to certain areas that are strategically important for fire protection. And then as we get further out, we just go, okay, you know, we can't do this, we can't do everything, but let's start thinking zonally about our property, as Scott mentioned, from the kind of the original indigenous people's way of thinking about fire protection or fire management on the landscape. So I think that's something that early on it should be really well defined. What places are important, what places get treatment, what places don't you worry about, and that'd be part of the criteria as you strategically think about how are you going to take on this task.
Well, that's a good point, and Schwinn knows that, you know, in this BRIC grant that we applied for, the $50 million from FEMA, is that part of it is using goats and, you know, the sheep to graze down some of those areas, and so it had to have that natural component to the grant application. Okay, Mr. Burks.
Mr. Burks, sorry to put you on the spot, but we did have a good conversation about this, and I wanted to make sure that I hadn't left out any of the items that we had discussed.
No, thank you. John Burks, Assistant PBS Director. I don't have anything to add based on our sort of solution-based conversation as of this time. I think that we've brought up all the meaningful topics. I'm looking forward to, you know, trying to find what the proper pathway or best pathway given laws is. The only thing that I would add is just consideration from both the General Government Committee and the Board, of course, that we have our code enforcement issued priorities and limited resources. And in these tough economic times, I just want to make sure that I'm being responsible as the Assistant Director to say that you know, that is a conversation worth having, because I know that code enforcement has about 1/3 of their total allocated staff at the moment. So if we're going to invest some effort in this, some guidance on what we would need to pivot from to be successful is going to be valuable advice that we'll likely need at some point. And then again, talking resources, you know, I'm hoping that there will be them, but we only have so many staff. So even if we do have the funds, I just want to be clear on what the expectations are so that we don't accidentally let a ball drop that makes sense.
Okay, duly noted.
Thank you.
Okay. Tamara Alanis.
Thank you, Chair Haschek. I just wanted to, Tamara Alanis, Brook Trails Township Community Services District. I just wanted to, I do have a couple things that I wanted to talk to the committee about really quickly while we have the chance today. You know, what I always say, Jim, is you can't stop evapotranspiration. So it was funny to hear that photosynthesis thing. So, you know, and with evapotranspiration, really, that's how we move on these types of biochar, you know, reducing the water content of the vegetation and turning it into something usable. And although doing biochar on private properties might be difficult, we have talked in the past, especially when Director Orth was on the Brook Trails board still, about using greenbelt properties and some of the vegetation on greenbelt properties, which have the larger, more contiguous intact areas for potential biochar creation. So just throwing that out there. But what I really want to talk about is the fact that we are grateful that the county is looking at going back to potentially trying to do tax sales with some of these unresponsive, non-tax paid lots. And in that process, what I would like to throw out is kind of this possibility that, let's say we've got right now 299 that are proceeding because they're within that 5-year window, and this is the year that they go to the tax lots. My staff, myself, I would love to sit down with that list, look at the list, look at where do we have a water connection so we know it's a developed lot? Is it adjacent to some of these tax lots? And we could actually participate, for 300 properties, we could participate in reaching out to those adjacent property owners. And if they do have an interest, now you mentioned view shed protection, which thank you for doing that too, because you want to protect your view shed by the property, right? Now, maybe they don't want to protect their view shed, but maybe they want to actually increase the size of their property, right? So if those property owners, this is something that's in the county specific plan for the Brook Trails area, which is the combination of lots for the reduction of overall total lots. And there are a lot of property owners that I think might be willing to, say, participate in the tax sale, right? Pay the $5,000 for the property. The county gets that $5,000 recovery. They get an opportunity maybe to do a free lot merger. So they get the property. That property becomes part of their overall larger property. They have a larger lot. We reduce that lot. Now, one, that reduces the tax income and the assessment income to our district as well. We understand that, but you're already having a non-responsive, unpaying owner. That revenue doesn't change, but it does potentially give us the ability to have a responsive owner that is already abating a property. We have a lot of property owners that band together on abatement with their neighbors, and then they get a better price because they can work with the contractor, and the contractor has a bigger job. There are a lot of ways that that we can assist, I think, in the outreach, mentioning if that is possible with the planning and implementation grants. If part of the planning is, you know, coming up with a way to establish a policy that says that the county has determined that this is a legal way to proceed, we can target these tax sales to potentially adjacent property owners. And what if 50 out of 299 work out that way? That to me would be awesome. If 29 work out, I mean 10%, you know, maybe not so great, but it's better than nothing. So, you know, looking at that list and the proximity of ownership to that is something that our district can assist with. And I hope that we do have the opportunity to work with county staff and come up with that as maybe a possible way to move forward in the mix.
Okay. Thank you for that idea. So with the property lot mergers, and certainly there's an expense to the county, I was wondering if Schwinn has an idea about if that could be incorporated into the grant repurposing.
So at the Malala Executive Office, we will have to work with the team, come up with the scope to get this new if you want staff time to be, reimbursed, covered by the grant, it will take a while though. Working with the state for amendment, get it, new contract, for example. It is possible. I just don't know if you want to wait for that process.
Okay, so if this lot auction sale is going on in June, or is that what I remember from yesterday, July?
I believe they're starting to work on it in June. I don't know that they're necessarily going to make it happen in June, but it's sort of on their next round of important things to do. It's going to take some time, I think, for them to get it together as well.
Okay. And it would take time to repurpose this grant, is what I'm hearing too. Right? Okay, well, thank you for that idea. And one more question. If property owners don't want to take these lots and you have the green belt, is it possible to merge a lot into the green belt?
If there's adjacency to the green belt and the property did not sell at a tax sale, and the county decided that they wanted to dedicate that property instead and do a title change into the name of the district, one, again, you wouldn't have, that wouldn't give you a source of revenue. You wouldn't have the money paid on the property. And also what it would do is create the situation that we already have, which is how do we pay to manage the green belt? So I do think that that's not dissimilar to, say, the real estate investor coming and buying up the tax lots and then selling them for $1,000 or $2,000 extra per lot and then passing the buck. In a way, that's passing the buck as far as I'm concerned, because as a district, we're already in a situation where we're trying to manage the green belt. So we'd have to look at the lots, look at their proximity, and see, does that impact us? The other part of that, and something that we're working more with CAL FIRE on management in the Greenbelt is, we're in the state, and this is just Brook Trails I'm speaking specifically, we're in the state resource area, which means CAL FIRE is responsible for wildfire. We haven't had a structure fire that has started a wildfire in Brook Trails, but the wildfire responsibility does lie in the hands of Caltrans, and in that regard, Caltrans works with us on vegetation management, small grants. This year they actually contacted us because they didn't really have a lot of fires, and so there was some money, resources, and staff time that they wanted to reallocate, and they identified a few areas in the Greenbelt that they were going to go in and just do some mastication and chipping, and then mostly we broadcast the chips out, which actually help to prevent the understory from growing as well. So in that regard, that's the other part of it, is are these areas maybe adjacent to areas that have already been treated? So those would be some of the questions that we would ask in that process is all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just what I was thinking was that if they were part of the green belt, then at least we have approval more or less to
absolutely. That's exactly right.
Deal with them, right?
We're so grateful to Mendocino Fire Safe Council and all the work that they're doing. Jim, you had mentioned, or excuse me, Council Ross, you had mentioned also, about this, setting up fire breaks, and really, Fire Safe Council and the Brook Trails Fire Department and CAL FIRE, you have identified those areas and are doing work on that. But what we're running into too is, fortunately, we have an encroachment permit process where if a landowner wants to do work on their property, they can just come in and say, I'm adjacent to the green belt. I'm going to go 100 feet into the green belt and abate that as well. And so in the efforts up on Ridge Road in particular and Blue Lakes, that area, if there's areas that are adjacent to Greenbelt or Brook Trails owned property, we are giving owner permission to Fire Safe to go on to those properties that are adjacent. But I think they are running into, I think Scott had mentioned this, kind of this hopscotching of non-responsive owners. And if I've got a non-responsive, and two responsive, and they're trying to go 100 feet, it doesn't meet up, so then there's the trespassing issue y'all want to avoid. We're not trespassers.
Okay, thank you. Right.
There we go. I'm sorry. When I was talking about the strategic effort on the fire breaks, I was primarily thinking of what you just mentioned is trying to figure out where, if you've got a fire break, finding out which of those properties are the ones that are preventing the fire break from being able to be done. And if we find out that, it's 20, that's a much more manageable process than 299.
Right.
I have a couple thoughts of recommendations at this point, but I'm happy to answer any questions before I put those on the table.
Well, we're scheduled to end this part at 10:30, and I think it's been a really good conversation. I would love to hear what next steps are.
Sure, and I think we should probably ask if there's any more public comment on the item.
Okay. Any more public comment on the item?
John Burks, Planning and Building Assistant Director. I just wanted to also make a comment in terms of thinking about the cost to do those lot mergers or boundary line adjustments. If we are looking at just a single one, it could be approximately $3,000. But I think that there is probably a pathway to do multiple at the same time. It would likely require board direction that would reduce sort of the individual expense, sort of the Kirkland brand of BLAs. So might be worth considering.
What? Kirkland brand?
Yeah, buy in bulk, right?
Okay.
So yeah, just do
Okay.
50 or 100 at a time. I don't know how many we could reasonably do staff-wise, but I just wanted to at least mention that fiscal component as we think about how much is available in grant dollars for that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Very good idea. Any other public comment? Okay. Paul Hansberry.
Yes, Paul Hansberry. One of the things that I keep hearing over is that the people are non-responsive. I think that a lot of people, but it's something you might want to think about, people have a bad taste in their mouth from the slapdash, the cavalier way that it was approached by PG&E for their line clearing, and people don't want to let them on and destroy their property. So that may, and so in the name of safety, maybe a little bit of education would go a long way, that they're not just going in there to get their line miles so they could take those figures to court, that they're actually working for safety. Just because people were a little gun shy because of the terrible way that it was done in the past by PG&E. I just thought I'd throw that in.
Right. Thank you, Paul. Good comments. Okay. Okay. Seeing no other comments, nothing else on the line? Okay.
If I may, through the chair. Originally, I had thought about some recommended actions for the committee to send to the board at this time. After the full discussion of this, my recommendation at this point would be that you allow staff, and when I say staff, I mean including myself, to talk with the Fire Safe Council, the CSD, and talk about some of the things that have been mentioned here to see what the problems are and how best maybe to approach those. And then also talk to the tax collector, get an idea of the schedule for their tax sales, and explore the idea of trying to target, some of the properties that are at the tax sale that might be helpful in this situation, and then bring this matter back either at the next general government committee or the following one. This is not going to be a short-term solution. It's a long-term strategic plan, and I think it would be helpful for us to have time to sort of fully, since I watched the Great British Baking Show, fully proof the idea before we bring it back to the committee. And then that way maybe we will have some good solid recommendations on a path forward.
All right, thank you. What I have from my list, from what I've heard today, is we need a legislative fix. So maybe we should proceed with that meeting with Assemblymember Wood and Senator McGuire's offices. Staff and Fire Safe Council will communicate, and Brook Trails, anyone else. the outreach, we need to be working on, can we facilitate outreach for the people who are trying to, these agencies that are trying to do the work? A strategic approach, figuring out if CAL FIRE or Brook Trails or any of these, fire agencies have an approach that they want to see implemented that is being blocked at this point. And then finally, the tax collector and the sales and what we can do with that, and emerging properties. And, lots of possibility there. Supervisor McGordy?
I think everything's been covered.
All right. So do we have that captured with staff? I guess I'm looking to Steve Dunnicliff. How do we proceed with all of these endeavors?
Steve Dunnicliff, Deputy CEO. So I've taken notes. It sounds like we have willing participants at a staff level and trying to help shake this through. So I believe that these are fairly reasonable conversations for us to have, at least with regard to talking to the Fire Safe Council and the CSD. Interim Council Ross had suggested talking to the tax collector and trying to set up a collaborative approach for Brook Trail staff to review parcels for adjacent owners that might be willing to take them off the roll, off the unpaid roll. Certainly speaking with Assemblymember Wood or his office regarding a legislative fix, I think is a solution under the purview of you, Supervisor Azjak. And so those are the notes that I've gotten.
Supervisor McGordy.
Yeah, I would also involve RCRC just to be sure that we've got them on our and CSAC as well. So they do have natural resource political analysts that are tracking what's going on, and bringing them into the conversation is very easy to do and probably well worth the time.
But Supervisor McGordy, can you contact RCRC? And
yes, I can.
Okay, you're the rep, and I'm the rep for CSAC, so I will contact CSAC too to include them in these conversations. Another issue was that the repurposing of this grant Quinn was talking about. And is it too early to be talking about that, or do we need to figure out with the tax collector and all that, have that kind of information before we proceed on repurposing? I'm seeing nodding heads.
I'm always cautious of the law of unintended consequences, so I like to sort of figure out what other, is something feasible? Are there any obstacles? And if those obstacles exist, how you can overcome them. And so, my thought would be, again, to allow staff, because I don't think it'll take a great deal of time to figure out how feasible some of these ideas are and maybe what the best approach is. And then we could return to the committee with recommendations to take to the board. Once we've sort of vetted them out a little bit, fully proofed them.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Anything else for the good of the order on this issue? Nope. Okay. So what we're going to do right now is we're keeping within that hour-and-a-half time frame that we had for that item, and we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back at 10:40. Okay.
When I first realized that I was gonna be a parent, I was super scared. After 2 or 3 weeks of meeting in the home visiting program, I was totally comfortable with the fact that I was gonna have a baby. Yes, I was still scared, but at the same time, I felt like I had some sense of strength behind me.
If I didn't have those resources that Jeanette provided me, I think it would be harder now.
I got into the program and I realized, like, oh, this is nice. And now look at me, I work at a family resource center with parents and families, all this stuff.
I'm so grateful that I got the opportunity to meet my home visitor, because without her, I think that I would be 10 steps behind from where I'm at right now.
Pero pues aquí pues ya los enseñan un poquito más cosas que uno no sabía. Como cuidarla, cómo desarrollarla, cómo educarla, y pues es algo bien porque pues cosas que yo no sabía, pues ya usted nos las dijo y todo como consejos, y pues muchas cosas que se aprendieron.
I don't know what's normal for a 22-month-old baby or an 18-month-old baby, you know. When we get together, we usually discuss and get some progress made with the baby. It makes me feel comfortable, and I associate my parenting with her, my home visitor, telling me, yeah, this is going great.
So it's nice to know where they're at, what stage they're at for every parent, and also to give, again, your children that head start in education.
If I had any questions with her, just call her up on the phone. You know, it was very relatable, very personal. And, you know, with her getting to know my kids, you know, she got to kind of help guide me along the way. I mean, there were so many cool things that I've learned.
I went from a very like rough type of life. I was homeless, and she was able to help me get into school, and I actually have enough credits to graduate with the business degree right now.
I think I really want to mention just that I'm grateful that I took advantage, because it's something that has put me in touch with my child, or closer to my child and her development.
I want other people and parents to know that the home visiting is not something that you should be afraid of. It's actually something that is needed.
You know, because she's not just here for her, she's here to help with all of it. She helped me create a safe space where I feel comfortable enough to ask for help.
Don't be afraid to take that step. Like, don't be afraid to get help. It's always okay to have extra support.
I would say, give it a try. You got nothing to lose. It's free. There's some perks, you know. They've got some great resources.
Personally, I think everybody could benefit from the home visiting programs.
I realized that my life was going to change dramatically in ways that I did not know or understand or even comprehend. I was going to have to really go to the well and become accountable and adjust to a lot of things differently.
Que queríamos era que naciera, ya quiero tener, entonces ahorita lo que tenemos es aprovecharla, quererla y cuidarla lo más que se pueda.
Creo que a todos nos preocupa la primera vez que nos dicen que vamos a ser padres.
When we started the program, my daughter was about 3 months, and my daughter's 22 months now. Something I love about my child, that she's healthy, she's happy, she knows that she's cared for and loved. Those are some of the things that I wanted to make sure that she had, and she has them.
I'm happy today with my daughter. She's the greatest thing in my life, and I'm glad to wake up and see her, and everything I do it for her.
Sí, bueno, yo también vengo de una familia separada. Creo que por eso también me motiva a estar más presente con él, de quizás también estar de la forma quizás que yo no la tuve para Máximo. Y también comprender que el padre no solo es el que pone los límites y las reglas, sino que también está ahí para hablar, acompañar, regalonear, jugar, cosas lindas también, no solo ser el guía para el niño, sino que también un compañero de vida.
I was more of elated and thankful because for 3 months I was in baby land, and when you're in baby world, you're just kind of flying by the seat of your pants and hoping that you're just supportive in the ways that you can be supportive.
Pero pues aquí pues ya los enseñan un poquito más cosas que uno no sabía, como cuidarla, cómo desarrollarla, cómo educarla, y pues es algo bien porque pues cosas que yo no sabía, pues ya usted nos las dijo y todo como consejos, y pues muchas cosas que se aprendieron.
Bueno, creo que por mi parte esperaba algo totalmente diferente, como un programa más frío, por decir algo, no tan cercano a la familia, sino más bien un programa de Estado programado para la ayuda solamente. Y a través del programa nos hemos dado cuenta que también pasa a ser una familia con nosotros, porque nos apoya en los momentos difíciles o cuando nos hemos visto en dificultades. Siempre nos hemos podido apoyar en Gaby a través de su programa. Encuentro que ha sido fundamental el apoyo.
You know, my experience has been nothing but positive. Annette has been wonderful. She's on time. She lets me know if there's going to be any changes in the schedule.
Not only did we get the assistance with this program, but we also made a really good friend. I'm happy to call Gabby our friend.
I still feel the challenge of being a parent now in today's world is immense. I think that you need support.
Es un gran apoyo para nuevos padres, y más aún si están en nuestra situación, que somos extranjeros, que nuestra familia y amigos, como dice Carla, están en otro país, lejos. Entonces sí, viene muy bien el programa para apoyarse tanto emocional y como anímicamente, y bueno, en varios aspectos del programa, que nos ayuda a seguir adelante con esta nueva aventura.
Don't be afraid to take that step. Like, don't be afraid to get help, because you might think that you know what you're doing, but it's always okay to have extra support, and don't do it alone.
Give it a try. You got nothing to lose. It's free. I'm grateful that I took advantage, because it's something that has put me in touch with my child, or closer to my child and her development.
Are you prepared? We're the Office of Emergency Services, and we're committed to providing the most up-to-date and accurate information so that you and your family can stay safe during an emergency. Visit MendoReady.org. It's our one-stop shop for emergency information. You can sign up for emergency alerts, find your pre-established evacuation zone on our current emergencies map, and find hazard and preparedness information.
Imagine you're faced with a disaster such as a wildfire, and you're ordered to evacuate. I'll bet you wish you had more time in that moment. Now's your chance to buy yourself that time. Sign up for Nixle and Mendo Alerts on our website, MendoReady.org. Do it today.
If you want your family to be as resilient as possible, it's important to take some time today and visit MendoReady.org, where you can look up your pre-established evacuation zones on our current emergencies map. You can also find important tools to help maintain your situational awareness, such as the Alert California wildfire cameras and the Caltrans road conditions cameras. We hope you'll take some time today to prepare so that your family can be Mendo ready. Thank you.
All right, we're going to call the meeting back to order. Let's see, we're on item 2B, which is discussion and possible action, including acceptance of informational presentation from the Mendocino Cannabis Department regarding MCD's adopted fee schedule. So I'm going to look to Sarah for a report.
Good morning, Supervisors. Sarah McBurney, the Senior Program Manager with Mendocino County Cannabis Department. The department has received a lot of feedback in regards to our recently adopted fee schedule, and therefore we thought it would be appropriate to have a presentation in open collaboration at GDC. Some of the feedback that we've heard is an interest in the cost of a satellite inspection versus an in-person or boots-on-the-ground inspection. The fact that the renewal fee is no longer a separate item and does include a site inspection as a part of the cost that it is, and the fact that there is now a withdrawal fee as well. So kind of an overview of the adopted MCD fees as they stand. The department is currently at full cost recovery for specific services provided. However, the department is still relying on general fund contribution as well. I think it's important to note that as we're still continuing to work through the backlog of licenses that have been in waiting for initial issuance, we are also still processing applications that we may have received payment for years ago, 2017, 2018. So I think that's part of the general fund contribution as well, is just doing that outdated workload. As a part of the presentation today and the agenda item, we did include our worksheets as the backup material to today's discussion. So this will go into specific fees and kind of the hours associated with each of the fees, which are based off of our time studies. I think one thing that's important to note when you're looking at the overall worksheet is there is an element of smoothing that happens. So for example, an inspection that takes place in Covelo is going to cost the same for an inspection that occurs in Ukiah. And that's just to make sure that we have that average, for everyone. And then same thing as, with the building department, a building permit in Covelo costs the same as it costs in Ukiah as well. In our renewal fee specifically, we have averaged, our time studies for renewals ranged anywhere from 7.25 to 14.5 hours per renewal. And with that, the average was about 10 hours that we took in for a renewal with a 5-hour site inspection added onto it. That site inspection does include the travel time, so that would be for your boots on the ground inspections. Currently, how our renewal fee and our site inspections are calculated, the department is estimating a projected 200 site inspections per year. 150 of those would be for renewal in-program site inspections. Per our site inspection policy, which is also included on the agenda item, any type of renewal would need to have at least one physical boots on the ground site inspection every 5 years. So 150 of those site inspections automatically are going to be boots on the ground. So that's a good chunk of the 200 that we're projecting annually. The other ones that are in there is going to be about 40% that are 5% randomly selected sites who are in program, and it may not be their renewal year. So as the new streamlined ordinance calls renewals for 5-year, if I'm an applicant and I was issued this year in 2024, my renewal is not until 2029. There's going to be 40 sites per year that are randomly chosen for site inspections just to check in, make sure everything's good. Of those about 40 sites that will be randomly selected each year, there is different criteria to ensure that they could be potentially virtual site inspections, or they may have to be physical as well if they don't meet the certain criteria that we're looking for. So the department's estimating at least half of those random site inspections will also be on the ground because they don't meet the key criteria to be a virtual site inspection. So out of the 200 site inspections that are incorporated into our renewal fee, there's about 170, 180 that automatically are going to be boots on the ground, leaving only about 20 that are possible for a virtual site inspection. So when we talk about the cost of a site inspection, we talk about virtual site inspections versus boot on the ground. I really want to note that that physical aspect is a large, and it consumes the most our 200 site inspections that we're projecting each year. The criteria that would deem if any of those 40 random sites, the 5% that we're talking about, would be, does the CCBL have confirmed deviation between a submitted site plan and or aerial imagery or a history of non-compliance with the department or other county agencies? So if any of those factors come into play, that site would not be eligible for a virtual site inspection. Additionally, if the random inspection comes up and the site does show that it meets the above criteria, we would pull up the site remotely, and if we saw a deviation or if there was inconsistency with the site plan we had on file, we would then cease the virtual inspection and go on site as well. So there could be a chance that the site inspection starts remotely and finishes in person as well. At that point, the applicant would not be charged an additional fee. It would just be continuation of the current site inspection that's happening. The on-site average per the department time studies for a virtual versus on-site, out of our conducted sample that we have, so our average on-site site inspection is 5 hours, and our average virtual inspection is about an hour. So that's kind of, what we wanted to talk about in terms of site inspections, physical versus in-person. The other thing that we received a lot of feedback on was our withdrawal fee. So when the department worked to get total cost recovery, we took the total amount of time that it took to do a withdrawal, and it was limited. We averaged 30 minutes, so we just took that, did our hourly fee, divided it in half, came out to $48. And as this total cost recovery has kind of come into play with the department, it doesn't make sense to have it as a standalone fee, because ultimately, if someone is trying to withdraw from the program, trying to collect that $48 from them, as a department, we're going to spend more money trying to track down that $48 than it would cost to collect the $48. So the department's thought for that withdrawal fee is baking it into the initial application fee. If we have, at this point, 700 applicants in program, there's a thought that they could withdraw. So somehow baking that into the initial application fees in future fee studies that we conduct and bring them in front of the board.
If I could just explore that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So with the 700 we have, then if we're thinking that maybe 100 will withdraw, or just throwing out numbers. Okay, so that's 1/7, right? Then are we splitting that? Are we saying that 100 of them are going to need that half-hour time? So that's 50 hours of work, and we're spreading that 50 hours over the 700. Is that how it works?
That would be correct. So yeah,
Okay.
That's kind of the process of that smoothing idea as well. I think it makes more sense in practicality than how we're currently introducing the standalone fee.
Okay, so it's kind of like an insurance policy in a way.
Yeah, that's correct. And a lot of our other kind of standalone fees for the $48 as well, there's an idea that those could be smoothed as well, just because, there's a way to introduce those or maybe pair them with other already established fees on the schedule.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. In terms of kind of what we're thinking for move forward plans and what we're thinking about bringing in front of the board for future fee evaluations of the Mendocino County Cannabis Department, knowing that we're still relying largely in part on that general fund contribution, some of the ideas that we have either had thought about or flown around or starting to kind of look at is, potentially looking at fees by type of license. So depending upon your subtype of license, if you have a larger operation, that would be more expensive than the smaller types of cultivation that don't allow you to cultivate as much. And in theory, our time studies now show an average across the board, but the minimum fee would still remain, and then larger types would go up in theory, depending upon what those time studies show. As we are working in towards our Excella Phase 2, there is going to be a really big emphasis on renewals and expirations. So as we get into the sync of things and as we are having these 5-year renewals happen, applicants will get a 90, 60, 30-day notice that their renewal application is expiring. And then after that application expires, There will be the department would like to look at possibly exploring a post-renewal reinstatement fee to kind of get that expired license back into that active status. So this would require, the applicants to kind of know when their expiration date is happening, ensure that they're really proactive with these renewals. Obviously, the department would outreach to them as well. But, some type of reinstatement fee post expiration. Additionally, there's an idea of unreported modifications. So if an applicant has a 5-year renewal and they modify at some point in that 5-year renewal and they don't report that to the department comes to their 5-year renewal time, they pick up the application expecting it to be a pretty seamless process, exploring the same site that was reviewed, that's on file that we have, and then they deem that there was a modification at some point that was not reported to the department. What happens is an excess workload on our end to do some investigative work to see what happened, how did we get here. It requires outreach to the applicant as well to see when this modification occurred. Are there appropriate permits called out for it, whatever it may be. So any type of modification that is not reported in that 5-year renewal process would require extra work on the department. So that would potentially be a higher modification fee than if applicants are going in their 5 years, they say, hey, 2 years in, I would like to build another greenhouse. They report it to the department. We do the modification, get the current site plan on file. When it comes time for their renewal, 3 years later, everything would be seamless. The site plan's going to match perfectly. We know exactly what we're walking into. Those unforeseen circumstances can really can hinder the department's ability to be streamlined in their processes in the renewal process. There's a couple other things such as administrative permits or compliance plans that we're currently not collecting fees on as well. So the thought process is maybe that could be something that we look into as we gather our time studies on those. And right now, APs are administrative permits are currently being handled by PBS, but the department is getting their toes wet in the administrative permit process. So that may be something we can look at. And then kind of lastly, one thing that we had talked about is currently our fee schedule as it stands only has a special inspection fee, which is largely fee incorporated based on a physical on-site inspection. So the thought is because that virtual site inspection is only an hour compared to the 5 hours, there's a thought that we could have a special satellite inspection fee in addition to the physical inspection. That way, if a special inspection fee is required and we do get to do it aerial and we are able to conduct that and not have to go out, it would be a lesser cost for the applicant at that point. That concludes the overall presentation that we have for today. But wanted to get the conversation started in regards to our department fee schedule as it has already been adopted, but just kind of clear the air about some of the feedback we've been hearing.
Okay. Well, question I have is, as far as the virtual site inspection, and we're using Planet, what's it called?
Planet Labs imagery.
Yeah. And that, my understanding is it's being paid for with the LJAGP?
That is correct. At this time, the program itself for satellite imagery through Planet Labs is being paid for by LJAGP funds. Any work, any hours of work that are put in to conduct a time study, however, would be a separate cost to the department. So it's paying for the software itself, but it wouldn't be paying for the planner's time to review the site virtually.
Okay. And then when things go, the LJGP is done, then we're going to have to find either continue on with Planet Lab or find a cheaper version of that. And it seems like if we're not using it that often, that the overall, unless we're using it for other purposes or whatever, then the overall cost per applicant is going to be very high. Even though we're saving, from 5 hours for boots on the ground to 1 hour, it's that kind of trade-off.
Yeah, that is correct. Currently, Planet Labs through the LJAGP fund is $351,000 a year. And even if you spread that evenly, all of our in-program applications were to receive a virtual site inspection, it still would be very costly towards our applicants. There are some other programs that the county does use for satellite imagery, and we're definitely exploring those options post LJAGP funding, which would be in year 2026, fiscal year 25-26. So, you know, as we explore those avenues, I think it's important to know that this is going to be a cost that the department will have to pick up, and it's going to be, you know, an additional cost that we'll have to experience.
Okay. Supervisor McGorty?
So, one of the things that I hope comes out of this, looking at it, that in the back of my mind has not been solved, which is actually having some sort of a crop report for Mendocino County on cannabis. And we had the two items of how much cannabis is under legal cultivation in terms of square feet, and also what are the income to Mendocino County. That would constitute, I think, a real breakthrough. And if we can report that when we do our crop reports, I think it would be good. It doesn't really give you the value of the crop, but at least it gives you something to reference that is meaningful to Mendocino County. Is that something that you think is feasible?
If I may, through the chair?
Sure.
Yeah, so the crop reporting requirement was removed from the most recent version of the streamlined ordinance, but the hope is that the applicants are able to really provide us that data. It's a request made by the Ag Department every year, and so I'm working with the Ag Department, and we'll be more closely working with them as they get nearer sending out that request to our applicants to make sure that they have updated contact information for our applicants as they do their reach out. So my hope is, you know, it's no longer a requirement, but, you know, I think our applicants definitely feel the desire that we have for that data and the importance of that data. So my hope is that we will be able to see an uptick in responses to that and be able to really have that data to leverage and utilize as we look at, you know, overall cannabis cultivation in Mendocino County. For what it's worth, and I know we're not there yet, in item 2D, we did go over the square footage that is currently licensed in Mendocino County. Now, that doesn't equate to the square footage grown. We do need that data from our cultivators.
I think even having what's licensed, any information we can have that really shows the size and the economic impact of the industry is useful. And gathering quality information for crop reports is a problem with a lot of our commodities, just because sometimes people don't want to share the information. The exception being grapes, because grapes, people have to report that too if it's processed. So we're able to track grape information pretty effectively. So typically what happens, like with the cattle people, they have kind of a cross-section of folks who they work with. They kind of know, usually our University of California livestock advisor knows who's where doing what, and they're able to put together a pretty meaningful report based on that that's, you know, semi-accurate. And I would hope that we could do the same thing with cannabis eventually, where we would have active participation from MCA or somebody who would give us an accurate cross-section. But any information would be useful.
All right. Well, I'm going to go to public comment. Any public comment?
I guess.
Hey.
Corinne Powell, cultivator. I only have one clarification question, and it's not so much a fee as it is clarification on the 5-year term for CCBLs. And is that 5-year term only commencing now after its approval in ordinance changes? So anybody prior to whenever it implements March 8th is still on a 1-year rotation? Is that correct?
If I may, through the chair? No, It's not correct.
Okay, correct me.
Perfect. So with the 5-year renewal plan, the Cannabis Department is unable to move forward with issuing a 5-year renewal until after our current ordinance, proposed ordinance is codified. So it's in that codification period now. Our belief is that it will go live on March 8th. So anything issued past March 8th in terms of a renewal would be able to be issued at a different value than 12 months. So typically, prior to the streamlined ordinance going live, if an application came up for renewal, they would get a 12-month renewal. We'd say, hey, it's March, great, we'll see you next March, everything's passed. What will kind of happen this year is if a cultivation is up for renewal in March, after March 8th, so let's just say March 9th, we'll come up to that application. We will do the normal renewal process for that application. The department has set aside different criterias and tiers for each application. And so depending upon which tier that application fell into. So for example, tier 5 is applicants who have a active DCC license. They don't have any type of compliance plan issues or notice of violations with any other county agencies. Tier 5 would really be your ideal applicant. They've renewed already at least once in program, so they've already paid us a renewal fee at some point during their cultivation process. That applicant in March would now be renewed for a 5-year renewal. And then, that application, there may be applications that fall into a 4-tier or a 3-tier or a 2-tier. To ensure that we have made sure that our workload is equal across that 5-year process, we are able to issue licenses with different than just 1 year, 2 year, 3 or 4 year, 5 or one time. So let's say an applicant was just renewed last July. That applicant, we could then extend their renewal to maybe a year. Maybe they renewed in July, but they are in tier 1. So they are up for a renewal in 1 year. However, in order to stay on track and our Gantt chart be equal, that applicant may not be renewed for a year and 6 months. So there is a little bit of difference to ensure that workload is streamlined. So, yes.
So I'm still unclear. Does that mean that the assignment of renewals to a tier, is that dependent on certain factors? How does that selection occur? What's the difference between the tiers? If the tier is what is influencing the amount of time on a new CCBL license after March 8th?
Yeah, Mr. Dunnicliff.
If I may, just as a very minor point of order, because we're talking about the fees right now, I think there is a connection because the speaker is asking about the amount of time. But I think that this discussion is a little bit more natural under the monthly update, where I believe we were prepared to speak to this.
Okay.
I'll be back.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Corinne. Very good. Any other comments online? Okay, Ms. Nelson.
Good morning, everybody. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, and please forgive me if I didn't catch all of it. I'm quite a bit tired, as I'm sure Ms. McBurney is, because she's been working like the devil also. With respect to these fee issues, I think that a lot of what was presented makes sense in terms of looking at ways that additional fees might be charged, but other fees go away and are absorbed into the application amount, such as the withdrawal fee just being a part of the overall cost of the application. That makes sense. The reinstatement fee may make sense or may not make sense, but I think that a time study has to be done. If it's literally that somebody's stuff has expired and somebody entered expired, then it really is not that much extra time to then, it's almost like just treating it like a new application fee. for reinstatement or something like that, because everything has to be looked over again. Modifications that are done at the time of renewal, I think is just the same as a modification done at any other time. It just would make sense. And again, I'll stress the desire to have clarity and a policy developed about which items truly require a modification fee versus information provided into the file of updates of certain information. And I'm going to give you the example that don't trigger a fee of, let's say, the list of ag chemicals that you use that you listed on your cultivation and operations plan is different, or that some other minor thing, and we gave examples in the past, and we would still love to have this issue developed for sometime in the future, so that we can sort out what really needs a modification and what doesn't, because I think that's a huge issue. But it seems like either way, whenever a modification happens, whether it's simultaneous with the renewal or it's another time, if it rises to the level of needing a full modification, that fee would just be that fee. I think that this whole issue about the on-site versus virtual is inspections is an interesting issue, and it does. I think that we're going to have to take this up again. And then just briefly with respect to the crop report, yes, we are all very mindful of wanting much more robust information, and I think all of us will work towards providing that information. I don't think that that has to do with the fees so much, but I completely concur, and we're going to do everything we can to help get people report for the crop report. And certainly switching a tax base to a gross receipts would help, and then self-reporting the square footage, and that's matched by inspection information.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hannah. Also. Okay. Any other comments online? Okay. Paul Hansberry.
Yes, good morning, Paul Hansberry. A couple of things. Regarding the fee schedule, for the renewal is the same as a new application. It seems to me that if someone's submitted an affidavit for renewal saying that there have been no changes, that a cursory, because what they inspect is the premises diagram, the site plan. Those sorts of things would be very easily checked out in the 1 hour virtual inspection, just to verify that in fact nothing else has changed. Those things should be very easily done and would reduce the cost. And if someone says that there's no change, then they, under penalty of perjury, they should be able to do that rather than having the full 5 hours and travel time and gas and all the different expenses that go with that. So I think that should be factored in, regardless of the tiers. With regards to the crop report, this may seem a little unorthodox, but it seems to me that there are different jurisdictions that have already declared cannabis as a crop. I think Santa Cruz County, I only know enough about that to make me dangerous, but it seems to me that it's the interpretation of the statute saying that marijuana is a agricultural product. Well, that's true. When it goes to the shelves, it is a product, but the agriculture, the cultivation of it is still a crop. So declaring that as, if Mendocino County would declare it as a crop, they could then enforce the like they do with the grapes for that report through the ag department, and it would also maybe send a signal to the state that they should do it as well, because again, the product once it hits the shelves is a product, but the cultivation is a crop. I feel pretty strongly about that, and the other fees as well. I think that anything that we can do to streamline I understand there's a fiscal responsibility for the department to become self-sufficient, but putting more things, the taxes and all the different fees accelerated, making them a bit more fair to people that where it's not really necessary. It's just more of a, just making sure that they're being truthful. I think that would be pretty easily done with the satellite imagery. And so those are the things that I think should be addressed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Supervisor McGorty.
I just wanted to comment on the idea of sort of a mandatory or forcing people to report. That's something that forcing and cannabis don't go together well. So I really prefer kind of an accurate voluntary methodology. And even, the Great Biz have been at it a long time, and they finally figured out a reasonable way to do it. They're still grumbling. So again, if there's a way for MCA to play a role in coming up with a sort of a good statistical sampling of different size growers so that they can get a sense of what the crop is worth. I think we have to have some trust here, and that's my recommendation for how we do this.
All right. And so, Chantel.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yes, thank you. I'm also calling in from home. It's different from being in the room for sure. I'll probably be much more succinct because I can't look at you all. I just have two comments. One, supporting a collaborative approach, continuing that way with MCA and with the consultant community in order to collect more timely information for the crop report. Agreeing with what Hannah said, that everybody, well, I don't want to say everybody, that's too much of a superlative, like many of us understand the benefit of accuracy in that report and a larger pool of submissions to create the data that would then be used for other purposes. And so if we can continue down the great collaborative path we've been on for the last several months and include data collection for the purpose of the crop report would be great. And I also, speaking about inspections, agree. I didn't quite know what to say on the concept of virtual versus on-site, but I would recommend, and I think that the department has taken this approach currently, then maybe there's still some vestiges of the old approach, which was a little bit more enforcement, policing, doubting of a like kind of perspective of the cannabis licensed community. But if we shift to most economical, efficient to accomplish what the need is and agree upon the need, then to look at the fees from that perspective. And so where applicable, use virtual and have that cost be reflective and should be less than an on-site, and where applicable, use an on-site in-person inspection. And I support, as I said already with Hannah, like, let's just talk about that issue more rather than just acknowledging it. It's something that's probably going to take more time than there is for it today. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other comments online? Okay, very good. So, let's see. Is there a motion? Do we need to do anything with this report? This is just informational report, right? So at this point, we'll just accept it. Okay. And Supervisor McGorty has an appointment at 11:45, or we need to stop at 11:45. So we're trying to get in that time frame. Okay. So item 2C, discussion and possible action, including providing recommendations to staff regarding the sensitive species habitat review, the SSHR screening tool. Okay.
and Steve Dunnicliff, Deputy CEO. So I know that Deputy County Counsel Schwass is going to be joining us for this conversation. He may be coming in at any moment, but I believe that we can do a very quick address on the monthly report, and so I would ask consideration that we take the activity report out of order.
Okay, we'll go to item 2D, discussion.
And we've got him.
Okay.
Your preference, Chair. I'm sorry.
Well, let's go with this SSHR tool, screening tool. And so if we could all, we have a half an hour left. So if we could all just make our points as concisely as possible, that'd be great.
Thank you, Chair. Hashtag Deputy County Counsel Jared Schwass. Just here to report on the SSHR screening tool. As we've learned several meetings ago that we've been working with CDFW to revise this tool. We've sent them revisions. They've made comments, and then we've taken these recent comments, applied additional comments, and then we have worked with the community to supplement our comments as well as CDFW's comments. So we are currently working collaboratively with the community to provide a response to CDFW. We had a very productive meeting last week to create a collaborative document with joint comments that will be sent to CDFW in the near future once we receive additional feedback from the community. And we are open to receiving additional feedback from any community members that have comments on the documents that have been uploaded. The current, what has been uploaded is comments from the county MCD. We did not include comments from the community already. That happened last week, and because that is still a work in progress, so we didn't want to upload it, but we did want to upload what the county current comments are to allow other public members to provide the county with any additional comments that they may have.
Okay, very good. And the best way to make these comments would be to MCD or
correct
your office or
yeah,
MCD?
MCD would be to apply them to that document that has been uploaded, and then email your comments on that document to the MCD.
Okay, very good, because I know that this is something that Supervisor McGordy and I were working on a long time ago and trying to get this tool as efficient as possible. So thank you. Any other comments? Okay, hearing none. Any public comments? Okay. Okay, online. Okay. Ms. Nelson, and I'm going to keep you to the timeline.
No, I'm going to be very brief. I agree that there's been great collaboration and we really appreciate the efforts. And it's nice to have this issue moving along, although it's going to take some more time. I do, however, request that the comments that Chantal and I have made in the county's comment document go ahead and be shared with the public, because it will save repeat comments. And I think that people have known that we have been following this issue and are very knowledgeable on this issue, and they may benefit from seeing what we also suggested. So that's the only request, is to go ahead and upload stakeholder comments to date as well, so people can comment on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is that a possibility? Can we do that as an addendum or, another attachment to this?
Yeah.
So people can reference that?
Yeah, the department can upload that onto their website as well, so it's easy access for everyone.
Okay, very good. All right. Chantal?
Hi there, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I also have really quick comments. Support what Hannah said, that without the greater public being able to see our comments on top of DFW and county council comments, it seems inefficient, and to we use what the time we already spent in putting comments in there and show it to everybody so that it's open to the public. I also would share that in the meeting that we had last week, and just acknowledgement and appreciation for this subject being given direct attention and beginning to move and where it was stuck for a long time. That is really great. I'm looking, let me just say this, how do I say it? When we met last week with the planner who is working on this issue and County Council Hannah and myself and Sarah, one thing that came to light was that the county's internal initial screening document is separate from the Exhibit A document that we're providing comments on, and that there is another layer of review and modification of that secondary document used internally by the county. It's the guidance provided to county staff by the previous cannabis department director in order to inform their review and to answer the questions that are in Exhibit A. And I raise this just so that the General Governance Committee members understand that there's another layer of analysis that needs to happen of what was being referred or what was being advised to county staff by the previous director. That's all.
Okay, thank you. All right. Supervisor McGordy, any comments? Okay, very good. Is that it for public comment? All right. Okay, so I think this is another informational item. So thank you very much, and I appreciate the work and collaboration that's been going on. Okay, and I guess one question about this is with CDFW, you know, have we seen any uptick? You know, when I had that conversation with Angela Liebenberg, she said that they were going to dedicate some days to reviewing the referrals, and so have we seen any kind of activity there?
Not extensively. I do have a subject on this for item 2D as well that I'll touch on a little bit more.
Okay. Okay, so we'll move on to item 2D. Okay, discussion and possible action including providing recommendations to staff and a referral to the Board of Supervisors recommending approval of the County of Mendocino Cannabis Department monthly update for January 2024. All right, Ms. McBurney.
Sarah McBurney, Senior Program Manager. Welcome to the quickest monthly report from the Cannabis Department to date so far. Just want a high-level overview of our January 2024 report. So during the month of January, the department had 79 total completion of applications. In that 79, there was 10 renewals, 31 initial issuances, 36 applications withdrawn, and 2 denied. Additionally, the department did add in a new topic of total approximate square footage licensed as well as under review. So I do want to note that this is the total amount of square footage that could be licensed, not necessarily the total amount of square footage that is currently being cultivated. So this is just the amount that we could have potentially cultivating if everyone was maximizing their full license potential. But for the month of January, we had 4.2 million square feet of cultivation under a license status and an additional 2.8 million square feet under review. To touch on the CDFW response time, the department is still currently awaiting 28 referrals deemed by the department as not less than significant. The MCD policy that was created a few months back to move applications forward as long as they were deemed less than significant has moved forward 63 applications. So with those two together, we're looking at a little 80 to 90 applications that we have not received comment on from CDFW. I think that we have seen somewhat of an uptick from CDFW. However, as we continue to ramp up and as we continue to near the DCC deadline, this is a topic that is a logjam in the department, and we will need continuous attention on to ensure that it's not preventing us from making that deadline as we near it. So it is something that I will continue to bring up at GGC meetings, and we can continue to elevate as needed to Angela if appropriate.
Okay, and please let me know.
Absolutely. For the month of January, the department continued on our non-responsive request from applicants. So during the month of December, the department sent out 210 notices to applications that did not have a DCC on file with the Mendocino County Cannabis Department. Out of these 210 notifications, we received some response. In January, we reached out to 135 applicants as a second terms of outreach. And so we reached out to the 135 applicants via USPS, regular mail, certified mail, and in addition, a phone call to them to try to get some sort of response from them and ultimately decide if they wanted to remain in program or not. The total responses received from that project out of the 210 from the initial outreach was 120. So at the close of January, we still had 90 applicants that we had not heard back from that were in risk of being denied from the department. Quick EIR update for everyone. Although we don't have specific timeframes, we were able to chat a little bit with the DCC and received clarification that they are currently reviewing Phase 3 applications and folks who have applied straight for their annual, in addition to reviewing provisional licensees at the same time. Their biggest request of applicants was, if you receive a deficiency notice from the DCC, please respond to it immediately. This will help streamline your process and help get your application under review as they're continuing their review process. If anyone has specific questions in regards to their license or the EIR process at either the state level or the EIR process at the county level, please email licensing@cannabis.ca.gov. With specific questions. That is the direction given by the DCC. And if applicants have reached out to that email address and are not receiving a response from the DCC and can show that they've tried to outreach several times, they're more than welcome to escalate that to the department as well, and we can help do outreach on our side. Again, the deficiency notices are going to be the key. As we talked about a little bit briefly this morning during agenda item 2B, our ordinance did have its first reading on January 23rd of 2024. The second reading did go in front of the board earlier this month, and the department anticipates the new ordinance will go into effect on March 8th, 2024. There's a couple high-level updates with that new ordinance. I think the top one is the introduction of the 5-year renewal process for the department. How the department anticipates handling and ensuring that workload is best equalized amongst the 5 years. The department has taken all of our current CCBLs in program, which at this time, as of this week, is 698. We've divided it into about 5 different tiers. So there's tier 1, tier 2, etc. Tier 1 would be folks who are deemed to have a 1-year renewal. Tier 2 would be 2-year renewal, and so on down to 5 years. Once folks get on track with their renewal process, they will hit that 5-year renewal pass. So if you're in a tier 1 and you're going to be renewed in 2025, you won't be renewed again in theory until 2030. So you would be back on track for that 5-year renewal process. Quick overview of the tiers. So tier 1 is CCBLs without an active DCC license. This would include phase 3 applications and all relocations with an unmet compliance plan. Tier 2 would be CCBLs under review or issued only once. They've never paid a renewal fee to the department and have an unmet compliance plan or did not submit an Appendix G with the department. Tier 3 is kind of a catch-all bucket. They're CCBLs that don't meet the conditions of any other bucket, and so to streamline the workload, they just kind of landed in Tier 3. Tier 4 would be any remaining CCBLs that haven't been in the previous tiers without a compliance plan and Tier 5 is CBLs with an active DCC license, no compliance plan, and have renewed with the department at least once, or their first renewal is currently under review and will be renewed by the department this year. That's a high-level overview. The department anticipates to have this information available on our website and some sort of anonymous way for applicants to check their license number and see which tier they will fall into so they know what to expect with their next renewal or issuance with the department.
Well, I think, if I could just comment on that, I think the beauty of that is that as people get into more compliance, then their renewals will be extended longer. And so there's a real benefit. There's that carrot out there to having a long renewal. The 5-year period, hey, you're doing everything right. Good job. Move on.
Yeah, that is correct. And the department was extremely passionate about ensuring, as we looked at this workload, and the best way to kind of leverage it and make sure it was equal amongst the years. And I think it would have been really easy to just assign something random by number and have it, everyone under this bucket fits in this. And the department was extremely passionate, specifically our planning team, about recognizing the fact that there are applicants that have worked darn hard with us, and they have paid the department fees, multiple times, or are doing everything right. And I think this is a small way to recognize those folks that are in compliance, and it's definitely recognized by the planning team, and it's appreciated.
So with the tiers, we think that there'll be a balance of all the applicants or all the people in cultivation. It will be balanced out into 5 separate tiers, right?
That's our hope. So currently with Tier 1, there's 164 CCBLs. Tier 2 has 131. Tier 3 is 137, Tier 4 is 134, and Tier 5 is 132. I do want to note the importance of Tier 1 being a little bit more heavy in terms of the applications. It's got about 30 additional applications than the rest of the tiers. And the reason is these applications are folks that don't have a DCC license. And it's really important that as folks continue to come into compliance and into the regulated market, you cannot cultivate without that DCC license. So there is a chance that some of these folks will get their county license and will never explore that further, at which point they will not be able to cultivate and could remain in program at the county level, but wouldn't be able to cultivate. So there's a chance that a lot of those may fall off of our in-program applications.
Okay. Mr. Dunnicliffe.
And so Steve Dunnicliffe, Deputy CEO. And what's of paramount importance really is smoothing the workload over the 5-year period, because the ordinance does allow the department this one-time opportunity. So the tiers are a really well thought out plan, but they are going to be a guide. And so it's very possible that somebody that meets the criteria for one of the tiers will be bumped to another one to help us achieve that streamlined workflow, so that moving forward with the 5-year renewals, we'll be able to sort of count on a certain number of applications that need to be processed in any given year.
Right, and in a perfect world, we would do this plan, and then everyone gets to the 5-year renewals, and we're sailing smooth.
And under the current ordinance, we believe that's really the requirement, is that the ordinance was written to allow the department a one-time exception to the 5-year renewals. And so this is a way to ensure that the best actors are immediately in a 5-year renewal, and then a guide for the way that staggers down. Everybody, though, under the streamlined ordinance would then be on the 5-year renewal. So this is a one-time plan that steps the current applicant or the current CCBL program into the 5-year renewals.
Okay, very good.
Okay, and then lastly, just to give a high-level overview on both of our grant programs. So LEAP Round 3 closeout was completed in January of 2024. We did have, as we identified previously, a confirmed $54,000 return. That would need to go back to GOBIZ. That was for direct technical assistance. So that requirement was seen, and the LEAP Round 3 audit was closed out. Round 5, which was anticipated to have an award announcement in January, did not have an award announcement in January. However, on February 8th, the department received and notified applicants that we were awarded $1.8 million for round 5. At this time, all funding for direct grant applications, this is for LEAP direct grant applications, is already encumbered in the current queue that has been established of initial equity applicants awaiting funding. There will be a fee relief window expected to open, and details of that fee relief window will be released via Cannanote when they are available to us and to the community. We did bring back the cannabis calendar, which is also on our website, so I encourage applicants to keep an eye out on that for pertinent dates as well as our Cannanote. Additionally, lastly on LEAP, applicants who previously qualified under Camp RAID criteria solely received outreach from the department and will be ineligible for any future rounds of CEG funding unless they requalify under our new in January proposed but now accepted criteria. More information can be found on our website as well about that equity and what that entails. Additionally, applicants can apply or they can, part of the LJAGP direct grant application that's launching in March 1st, applicants will be able to apply for equity under our new criteria as well. For LJAGP,
well, just with the LEAP, I just really want to thank you and everyone else who worked on this. I know there's a lot of collaboration going on, and just, you know, there's that deadline and kind of crunch time, so really appreciate it, and it shows in getting the 1.8 million for the community, so thank you.
Thank you. For the LJAGP program, our direct grant manual was approved by the DCC in January. Our application period will open on March 1st at 12:01 a.m. So this Friday at midnight plus 1 minute, our direct grant application is scheduled to launch online, and applicants can go on and apply for that. Currently, it's for reimbursement amounts of $25,000. We did host a workshop last Friday, the 23rd, for applicants that had specific questions or wanted a preview of the application. Additionally, more information on the LJAGP direct grant can be found on our website as well. So I really encourage applicants to explore our website for all things cannabis.
All right, thank you. Supervisor McGordy, any comments?
I'm really impressed with the level of non-chaos that's going on here. You know, compared to when we were working together as the ad hoc, it just seemed to be so much confusion and so much uncertainty and a lot of friction, and I'm impressed at Ms. McBurney and the work that she's doing, and Mr. Dunicliffe, and you know, this is the most amazing turnaround I've seen in Mendocino County government that I did not ever anticipate, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing, and also the stakeholders in this that are also being very collaborative. And I think once given a reasonable ear from county government, have made this program look much better and hopefully function, which it appears to be doing. Thank you.
Very good. All right, any public comment? And we're going to try to, you know, just make the public comments as brief as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Corinne Powell, cultivator. I echo all of the kudos to the department and what they have done. So thanks everybody for hanging in there. And thank you for clarifying the tier thing. I appreciate that. I would like to draw attention to the square footage element that has been incorporated into this report. I believe it's the first month where we've had it. And I'm curious to know if we're considering fallowing in the numbers that we present. And I'm also concerned that we not blur the lines between outdoor, for example, in a permit size and indoor. of the same permit size, because the impacts of those two cultivation styles are very different impact on the environment and consumption of resources. So as we move forward with this square footage analysis and the thought about the crop report, et cetera, maybe we can have more discussions offline with that sort of thing.
Yeah, that was a good point. I think that would be helpful.
You've
if
answered
possible.
most of my questions. Is there no more state audit in process regarding Mendocino County's grant programs, either the LJAGP or the LEAP? I'm just curious to know about that. And if there is none, great. If there is, when there might be a determination of anything we need to know from an audit. I'm also a little curious to know about the addition of direct technical assistance from Cannabis Services in pertaining to grant management and what their scope of work is intended to be. And this is a technicality, but I hope we can just reassure the community. I believe that Ms. McBurney indicated at the excellent presentation meeting that they did last week that no liability insurance was required for the LJAGP program. Is that true? And again, let me say, it was an excellent meeting. When it was scheduled for 3 hours, I thought, oh, we'll never take that long, and we were right on the money, so it was perfect.
Well, you're right on the money too.
There we go.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. McBurney, can you answer those questions?
Absolutely. Sarah McBurney, Senior Program Manager. So fallowing is currently not taken into account in the square footage noted on the monthly report. This is simply who has been licensed at what square footage is allowed. So it absolutely is an approximation. It's not live as to what we're seeing in cultivation. And the hope is that would be reported through the crop reports. And there's more digging we can do as a department as well to kind of finesse these numbers. There is currently still an open audit of the LJAGP program. This is a California state audit. To date, that audit has not been cleared, and there is not a clear indication of the timeline to when that audit will be closed. GoBiz is currently under no more routine audits. We're good until we receive the next round of funding. Cannabis Services is the vendor that was procured during our most recent RFP process, and they will be handling direct technical assistance for the LEAP Round 5. They will not assist and cannot assist in any type of direct grant administration, as they will be all direct technical assistance. And the department is super excited to get another shot at offering direct technical assistance to our applicants and see it done in an appropriate manner for Mendocino County. For LJAGP at this time, there is not a liability insurance requirement, as program is reimbursement only, so the work has already been done. So at this point, there is not a liability requirement for LJAGP direct grants.
Okay, very good. Okay, so we have just a couple minutes left. Hannah Nelson.
Yeah, hi, I'll be really brief. I think that maybe some of this can be dealt with next time, but I am well, first off, I want to point out that I did submit a letter in general expression commending the department and all of the collaboration. And we still have work to do, but it's really, it is a breath of fresh air. And this is a shining example in the county of what can be done if the right people and the right attitude is in there. There are some things about how some of the reports are done that I'd love to deal with next time. And I did have one clarifying question regarding submissions to the state. The comment was made with respect to the EIR, and I want clarification. Are you saying that the state has explicitly said that people can submit old complete App G materials to the state and the state will work to convert them? Or is that a misunderstanding or an interpretation that I just insinuated that is not accurate?
Okay, thank you, Ms. Nelson, for the letter. And Ms. McBurney.
So real quick, that is a not correct. Please do not, well, let me take that back. All Appendix G materials that were submitted to the department have been handed over to Ascent, who is currently the contractor running the EIR process on behalf of the state. So if any Appendix G materials or any CEQA-related work has or was turned into the department, the state has that. More specifically, if an applicant has specific questions regarding their review process or what their pathway looks like, or, you know, we get a lot of questions from applicants saying, how's our EIR going? We, Mendocino County, are not the lead agency for that EIR process, and those should be directed to the state. So that licensing at cannabis.ca.gov should be utilized for specific site-specific questions just in regards to the process and how that's going for individual applicants.
Okay, very good. Okay, Chantal.
Hi there, thank you. I'll go really quick. I have a question regarding the comments regarding Appendix G materials being passed to Ascent. Is Ascent then passing them to the DCC? And I'll go on mute right after this. And just bringing in, again, the shining star example, like Hannah just said, like this is how we can work together to create great government and quality of life in our region. And a lot of the language that was used on many people's comments was reasonable, functional, and collaborate. And that for us all to take credit for that, we've all participated in this, and it is totally possible to do it better and better. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Ms. McBurney.
Okay, so Appendix G's materials have been explicitly shared from Mendocino County to Ascent. Beyond sharing, beyond that point, I am unable to speak to if that has been relayed to the DCC. It is my belief that through the EIR process, it's collaborative and any resources would be shared as needed, but MCD shared those specifically to Ascent, not DCC.
Okay, thank you. MCA Zoom. Online.
Hi, this is Stephen Amato from President of the MCA. I actually forgot to lower my hand. I was going to ask the same question as Ms. Nelson, and I'm glad to have heard the answer. So I'll make this very brief and just, I'm very thankful of everything that's been going on. This is a really great process, and I hope we continue with the same energy. I was unable to comment earlier. I was detained on another meeting, but I did want to just point out I am very pleased, and our organization is pleased to hear, because we get a lot of feedback from people on the same topic, that there are some ideas being explored for reducing some fees for some of our lower tiered members, for the cottage licenses and smaller ones. It'd be a real shame to see them get gobbled up by fee increases and increased fees that really hurt them in a more impactful way than some of our larger cultivators and license holders. But all in all, any other questions I could ask offline. Thank you all for your time today.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Okay. Who is it? Oh, Paul Hansberry. Okay, Paul. Could you
Yes, absolutely. I'm just wondering, with in our part of the world, there's an insurance crisis. People are getting non-renewed for their insurance, et cetera, and they can't write new policies. I'm wondering if there's a way that we can get some relief or eliminate the requirement for the insurance for the equity people. You know, the reason that they need the grant is they don't have the money for things, and to pay for insurance that they can't get, and for them to be disqualified because they can't get $1 million worth of liability insurance seems a little excessive. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Okay, and so any other comments? Okay, so we'll accept the, you want to make a motion to accept the report?
I make a motion to accept the monthly cannabis department report.
And I'll second it. Okay?
Chair Hashak?
Yes.
Supervisor McCourty?
Yes.
The motion carries unanimously.
Okay, item 3A, approval of minutes of January 24th, 2024, regular meeting. Any comments? No. Okay, public comments? None. Okay,
I make a motion to approve the minutes from the January 24th meeting.
second?
Supervisor McCourty?
Yes.
Chair Hashak?
Yes.
The motion carries unanimously.
Okay, public expression. None? Any online?
Seeing none online.
All right, announcements. No, I did have a conversation the other day with members of MCA about the tax, the cannabis tax, and looking at restructuring it or whatever. You know, we're doing a 50% reduction that ends in 23-24, and so I think that should be we should be looking at that as a future agenda item. Okay.
And if I may, through the chair, for clarification on item number 2D, did that include the reference to the Board of Supervisors that was contained in the recommended action, the motion?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to confirm. Thank you.
Okay. And so I just think that in a future meeting, we need to have that as an agenda item, see what to do with cannabis taxes. Okay. And with that, at 11:51, we'll adjourn the meeting. Okay, thank you, everybody.